practice. Now let's talk about what Adobe did to invent new tools to try to make that selection process a lot faster. So, uh, magnetic lasso was the first one that they created. The magnetic lasso tool, what its job is to select things by contrasting color. What in the world does that mean? Contrast is the difference between light and dark areas. So, uh, let me show it to you this way. So if I have something that's this color and then something that's this color, that's a high contrast. There's a big difference between that darker red and this lighter red, all right, that I just painted. Because there's a big difference between the light and dark, so that's high contrast. If I something that's low contrast is when the difference between the colors are not that great. Say like these two. These are two completely different colors, but the contrast is kind of low between the two. You know, where they cross is kind of difficult to see where they cross at because it almost looks like it's the same color. You look at it long enough, you could tell that it's two distinct colors, but the contrast is not that large. So what the magnetic lasso does is that it looks at the pixels of an object. Usually you're having something that you're selecting. It's not a blank page like this. You have something that you want to select. And if it's a high contrast against the background, it should be able to pick up and select that object easily. If it's a low contrast, so it's not a big difference between the background and the subject, you're going to have some difficulties. So I'm going to open a picture. As part of the files that you would get in the lecture. All right. It's this one called dog that I'm going to open up here. When it opens up, if your working profile is different than the embedded profile, you will get this message to pop up. You could choose that second radio button to convert it to your working space, and then you'll see the dog here. I did a Control-0 to fit it on the screen, so it zoomed in nice and big. So, looking at this picture of the dog, it is a high contrast in certain areas and low contrast in other areas. Up here around the ears of the dog and going down its back, going around the tail, going around the back paws and the front paw here, it's kind of high contrast. This red porcelain dog is a real easy to see going around certain areas. But then when you get around towards the front of the face, when you get down here to the front paws, to the inside, that's more of a low contrast area. There's not a big difference between this darker red from the shadow and the background that's directly behind the dog. So this magnetic lasso tool is going to do probably a pretty good job going around the outside edge, around the back and everything. But then when I start getting around the paws in the front, maybe a little more difficult of a process of picking out those areas. And again, not a bad thing. It's just that's how the tool works. So you want to make adjustments as you can. Now, here is what you're going to do. Again, you select a tool, magnetic lasso, and then you're going to set your options. Now, I'm going to give you some advice on these options before you start using the tool. You're pretty much going to set some of these options in place, and you'll probably never touch them again. Because if you just follow through with my opinion of it, the options that I'm going to tell you are going to work for that tool, and it's going to work for this magnetic lasso, and it's not going to get any better. Just it's a matter of opinion, but I've noticed that no matter what I do, no matter what changes I make, it's not getting any better when I change to different options. So just bear with me here. So first part, the modifier button. I'm going to use the new selection. If I'm ever going to be using this magnetic lasso, I'm only going to be using it once on my subject, and then I'll switch to a different tool to add to and subtract from. So I just leave it on the making a new selection. I never even worry about the other modifier buttons with the magnetic lasso. Feather, of course, is going to be at 0. Now, anti-alias, what in the world does that mean? Let me zoom in on the dog here. So you can see this grid that makes up the pixels that make up this picture here. See right along the back of the dog. When you zoom in close enough, when you get to the edge of an object, you're going to see pixels along those edges. That's a combination between the subject color, red, and the background color, which is black here in this case. So you get little pixels that are kind of a combination. Now that's called an anti-alias edge. When you're looking at the picture at its regular size, everything looks smooth. In order to get that to look that way, those pixels have to do those combinations with the colors to try to make that smooth looking edge, especially when the line is not straight. So, this anti-alias that you turn on up here allows the tool that if it sees that little jagged anti-alias in the edge, it's going to try to smooth it out as best as it can. And I always say as best as it can because in some cases it's still kind of jagged because you have a low resolution image. Like this one, if I go to image and image size, and I can see what the resolution of this is. It's a 72 pixel per inch, probably the lowest that you'll ever have a picture for digital output at least. Wouldn't be able to use this picture to print because it's going to be too tiny because the resolution is too low. And if I try to blow that resolution up to make it a printable range, picture's going to go all groggy and gross looking. So anti-alias is one of the options that you want to have on. Again, set it and forget it. There's no need to change it. Now width, that's a number that's going to be variable, that you can change up and down. And I'm going to show you when I'm done with these settings here, how you would change this lasso width to work for you. What it's for is your lasso, which is your cursor. It could be so many pixels away from your subject and still be able to pick up the edge of the subject. So you don't have to have the cursor going right on the edge. It can waver inside or outside by a little bit. By how much is what you set up here for the width. But right now, you can't really see it that well with the lasso width. So there's another option that you turn on when you finish setting your options up. Now, the two options that you're going to be setting and probably never touching again is going to be this contrast number and this frequency number. For the contrast number, I usually set this number to either 15% or 20%. It has a range that goes all the way up to 100% and all the way down to 1%. What it's for the contrast. So anything that's high contrast, big difference between the subject and the background. This contrast number can be, all the way down to 1%, and it would still be able to pick up the edge. If it's a low contrast area, like down here between the paws and between the front paws, now I want to turn this contrast number up because the higher I go, then the less of a contrast difference that you got there, and it may still be able to pick up the edge even at that low contrast. What I've noticed is that with this contrast number, this is something you can't really change as you start using the tool. So since you can't change it while you're using the tool, I usually just set it to a number. Now, the default number that comes out of the box is 15%, and that works. For the most part, it'll get almost everything that you want to select. When you get to low contrast areas like there in between the paws, may not get as well. Some people will turn this number up to 50% since it has a range from 0 to 100. 50% should be kind of that right dead middle that it should be able to do a pretty good job. And it does. I'm not saying that 50% is wrong. I just usually go with 20%, 25%, 15%. I would set it to a number and just never touch it again. But I'll leave it at 50%. Let's see what happens with that. Frequency is another one of these that you'll set it and forget it. Now, this has a range value from 100 all the way down to 0. So what is this for? This is about accuracy. So what I mean by it is when you click and start going along the edge of your subject, you should be able to see these little dots that's flowing along this line that I'm drawing. Those dots are fastening points. Basically, they're trying to fasten this line to the edge of your subject. And the slower you kind of move along the edge, the more those fastening points get laid down. The faster you move, the less of them get laid down. And this frequency number up here is how many of those points get anchored in at any one given time. If you go too high of a number, it's going to start going around every one of the individual pixels within the picture, and you're going to get a real jaggy looking selection. It's going to be real jagged and rough. If you go too low, there's not enough of those fastening points. So now your selection is real smooth, but it's not very accurate. So what is the good number to go by? Usually in the 50s. So 57, I think, is the default. I usually leave it to that. 60 is probably as high as I've gone. And I've gotten pretty good results using that. So if you want to go by that kind of guideline, feel free, please do so. But you would set those numbers and never really change them unless, you're told to change them or you fear that the numbers that you put in here are not good enough. Now, using a tool and setting this width over here. So this lasso width can be visibly seen through your cursor. Now, your magnetic lasso tool and all the other tools here in the toolbox have two versions of the cursor. They have the standard cursor, which usually looks kind of like the magnetic lasso here, where depending on which tool that you pick, your cursor will change and look like the tool that's on the button. All right, so you'll have that. Then you also have what is called your precise cursor. Your precise cursor is going to be greatly valuable to this magnetic lasso because then you're going to see a circle and a crosshair. Now, to turn on the precise cursor for any of the tools, it's the caps lock key. When you hit that caps lock key on your keyboard, then your cursor is going to change to the precise cursor. So for the magnetic lasso, this is useful because now you're seeing the lasso width. So whatever you got that lasso width set to up here, that's what you get for the lasso width for that circle. The square bracket keys on your keyboard that I was talking about in the brush series, in the brush lecture, allows you to make that circle bigger or smaller every time you press and hold onto that particular button. It'll make the tool grow and shrink. So this means if I'm going around like the ear, I can have this circle be kind of big, but then when I get down where the details matter and I got to move a little slower, I can make the circle smaller so that way it forces me to move a little bit slower and a little closer to the subject so that way I can hug along the edges and be able to pick up what I need in the selection. It is just a process, but a good process nonetheless. So turn on your caps lock key. That'll give you your precise cursor. And then you can adjust the lasso width with the keyboard shortcut of the square bracket keys next to the letter P on your keyboard, or however you want to do it. I'll show you a problem that'll happen if you try to keep going back to the lasso width here. Now, the way this tool works, the crosshair in the middle of the circle, you move your cursor, you move that crosshair right on the edge of your subject. You click once, you'll lay down your first fastening point. Now, you can go along, depending on your lasso width that you set, you can go along there as fast as you can to lay down these different little anchor points. If you get like down here at the tail, it doesn't quite get to that little corner where the tail went to. So if you need to, you can click with your mouse and set one of these fastening points in place. And then you can keep moving the cursor around to kind of get what you want. Now, if you get to an area where or a moment where you sneeze, you get distracted, your hand twitches a bit, you'll get some of these fastening points out in the background or even in on your subject or what have you. If that ever happens, don't panic yet. Or if you try to go up here and realize that you need to change the lasso width, so now the picture is moving, you see that? And then you can't set the lasso width, so then you come back and you start getting this Charlotte's Web thing happening. Hitting your backspace button on your keyboard will get rid of the extra little points. You just got to move around to where those points are so they can be eliminated one at a time. And you can kind of get yourself back to a position where you can keep going. If you need to start completely over because you've done way too much and gone way too far down the deep end, hitting the escape key cancels what you were doing and gives you a chance to start over. So that way I could start over and go around with my lasso width set here. I can pick up the edge pretty well when I get down there by the tail. Maybe make the lasso width a little smaller. Click to add a point. Now make it bigger so I can go a little faster around. I get over here to the pause, then make it smaller again. So I have to go slower. So I could try to get that line to adhere to the edges of the paws and the legs. Trying not to twitch too hard or move too fast or quickly. Let's see. And you're trying to go for accuracy as much as possible. Depending on your subject, this is not going to work, or it will work depending on the subject. It'll work perfectly. But there are times where this doesn't work because there's other tools that were created by Adobe when they were getting complaints that this wasn't working as well as they wanted to, and they really couldn't get this to do any better. But for this particular subject, this particular picture, this is working real good. And then now, with your precise cursor on, when you get back to your starting point, your cursor will change over to that magnetic lasso tool. It'll just swap from the circle and crosshair to the cursor that is your lasso tool. That means you're on your starting point. Once you're on your starting point, a single click will give you now the marching ants based on what you had selected. It's never going to be perfect. So don't expect it to be perfect right out the box. But it's this tool with that little bit of work does work a little better than the lasso tool or the elliptical tool or anything like that to try to get some complex selection like this. Okay, magnetic lasso. Pretty cool tool. It works pretty well. It does its job. But like I said, there was complaints. Number one complaint, if it didn't quite get everything selected, you would go and try to switch to one of the other add to or subtract from modifier buttons, and then you're going to run into the same problems you had with not getting, an area selected properly or getting too much or not enough selected at one time. Because again, this thing goes by contrast. So the only way it picks up is that if it sees a difference between the colors. If it doesn't see a difference, then nothing really good is going to happen. So that's complaint number one. I can't switch around with adding to or subtracting from. What I would have to do is switch to a different tool, like say the lasso tool, and use the add to selection. And then I can add to the selection by simply, the simple click and drag around to add and add and add things in. That works. So what they did is that they invented some other tools. So one of the tools they invented would work good on something like this dog. Color of the dog is red, right? It's the only thing that's red inside this whole picture. So under your select menu, a couple other options. One that works very well is this color range. Color range option here pulls open this little dialog box and gives you a little preview of what's going to be done and what you'll be able to do. You have these little eyedroppers that you can turn on, right underneath the save button here. So the first eyedropper will select one color. And then if you got multiple colored items that you want to try to select all together, you can add to or subtract from that adjustment. And let me move this fuzziness slider down how it's supposed to go. I think the default on the fuzziness scale is probably somewhere around 50 or so. Can't remember. But what you'd be able to do is click on the dog. All right. And what happens is that the little preview interface is going to show you the colors that match wherever you clicked. And that's the first part of it. Then you have this fuzziness slider that you start ramping up. And as you ramp it up, you start to see that you're getting more and more selected because now it's increasing the range of that red that you selected first. And it's kind of adding on and adding on until it can try to get, as much of the dog selected as you can. It doesn't work all the way all the time because see, I turned this fuzziness all the way up to 200, which is as far as it'll go, but I still got areas that it did not pick up. Those are the areas that are black. The areas that are white is the areas that the colors that it got picked up. So what do? Well, I can use this eyedropper with the plus sign. And if I click either in this preview or on my subject, now you see it starts picking up more. But notice the background got gray in this preview. That's because now it's picking up some of the dark. So maybe turn this fuzziness slider down because it doesn't have to be so high anymore because I'm adding to the selection. And I can keep doing that until I get all the dogs selected or the majority of it, because there are times where you go way too far. So you're not going to be able to get it all selected out because you're not going to be able to select all of the dog and get the background not to be selected. It's a toss up. You can get as much as you can, and then the rest you'll have to do something else. But when you finish with that and hit OK, gives you a selection. It's going to look a lot rougher because there's areas that it did not pick up. You'll see little sparkly bits around the eyes, around different parts of the ear and the hair, like where the little chips are. You know, this right here, this one front paw didn't pick up hardly at all because that's real dark in that area, and it can't see that based on the color range. But it's a start. It's always a start. You can always go to another tool, like another lasso tool or something like that, and add to the selection and try to make this a little bit better, you know, so that works, but it's not always the best choice. Now, there's another tool that selects by color. It's called the Magic Wand tool. Now, your Magic Wand tool, it's hidden with all these other tools here. So, second column, second button down, you have this one button. I don't know what it looks like. It looks like a little, like a paintbrush, maybe drawing a circle. But hidden underneath that button, you have your Magic Wand tool. Looks like a magician's wand as the icon. So your standard cursor looks like a magician's wand. And then if you turn your caps lock key on, you get a crosshair. The way this tool works is up here in your options bar, you'll be able to select things by color. Now, how you do it is going to be subjective. So bear with me here on this one. I want to use the new selection button first to make a brand new selection. Then I'm going to set a sample size. And the sample size is you telling the computer, hey, sample out this many pixels away from where I click onto. So if you do a point sample, you're only selecting the 1 pixel that's right there. Then you have these averages of 3x3, 5x5, so forth and so on. Really, 3x3 is probably as high as you really need to go. But it selects the 3 pixels surrounding the one you clicked onto randomly. Measures the color value that's there, and then whatever that result is, that's going to be part of your selection. What's also going to factor into it is this tolerance number. Now, the default tolerance number is set at 32. It has a range between 255 and 0, where 128 is like the middle number, but you really don't want to have it that high anyway. The 32 sometimes is way too high. Now, tolerance is a weird thing to talk about a lot of times because it's involving math, number one, and number two, for what it has to cover. I'm trying to see if in my notes I already got it. Yes, I do. This is kind of an example of how this tolerance thing works. Hopefully this is going to make sense to you. So your tolerance value is set, let's say it's set to 32. That's a default number. So what you do is you take that tolerance number you have, divide it by 2. That's going to give you the range. So that range is the range of levels of color. So range of color levels. So remember, you have levels of color, 0 to 255. So 256 levels for each color in their RGB spectrum. So that's what it's doing. It's mapping out and assigning the color that you click onto to a color value, all right, to a level number. And then what you're doing with the tolerance is you're picking out the range value of that color. So what in the heck does that mean? Well, if you took 32 and divided by 2, that equals 16. Simple math, all right? That means you have a range of 16 levels above and 16 levels below whatever color that you click on. Whatever that color number is assigned to, you have that many levels up and that many levels down, all right? So if, let's say, the color that I click onto, that pixel that I click onto, let's say it's assigned a level value of 30 in this case. So 30 minus 16 is 14. That means that's the lowest value range. Okay. So the level value goes as low as 14. And then, well, I didn't put that in here. Why did I not put that in there? Hold on. Let me copy this over again. I don't know. I guess I deleted this at some point in time. Change that minus to a plus. And this 14 is 46. All right. So the highest number, the highest level is 46. So 30 plus 16 is 46. So the lowest value is 14. The highest value is 46. So now I'm looking at a color range between 14 and 46. So now the computer is going to look at wherever I click at. Say I click like right here on his cheek, for instance. Whatever number that's assigned, it's going to go 16 levels up, 16 levels down from that, and that's my range of color. So it's looking at all the pixels surrounding and see if it matches. If it matches, it adds it to the selection. If it doesn't match, like say the green eyes, or maybe that white or going to the black, it won't add that to the selection. So the way this works, you set up your sample size, you set up your tolerance number, whatever you want it to be. You click onto your subject, and you will see a range of color get selected. All right. May not be the entire subject, but it's going to get something. You can then go to your add or subtract from selection buttons up here to add or subtract from your selection and add more clicks. As you click, you get a larger range, larger and larger. You keep clicking until you get your subject selected. You can change the tolerance number. You can change the sample size. So this way, one click picks up even more or picks up less if you're trying to subtract from, or go with a low tolerance number. But the idea is that you can select things by color and be able to get more and more. Now, this can get kind of messy with something like this dog because of those little, I call them grumbly bits, like right here where the cursor is. I got this one little area that didn't quite get picked up in the selection. And if I click on it to take that away, it may add on to the selection in different places that I may or may not like. You know, if I get too close to the edge, it's going to start increasing the selection out toward past the edge of my subject. So now I got this little, what they call a dirty halo. It's a little dirty halo of black that's going to go around this in the selection because that's selected too. That could be a bad thing. Now, you do have the ability to undo stuff. You can go to your edit menu and you can choose undo, use that keyboard shortcut, Control Z, to kind of undo a click that you may have made, and you'll be left with everything else. You can again right click and deselect, or do Control D if you need to deselect and start over again. But the magic wand does have its uses. It does have its flaws. Again, none of these tools are ever going to be perfect. Magic wand, lasso tools, they work. They're always not the best, but they're a good start. They're things that you got to learn how to use them. Now come the complaints again. Complaints to Adobe. Magic Wand is Magic Lasso is Can't y'all do better? Adobe says yes. Let's try this tool. So then, hidden with the Magic Wand, they start creating these selection tools that work a lot faster, selected in a different way. So the first of one of these is this quick selection tool. So the quick selection tool, when you choose that and look up in the options bar, the modifier buttons have changed. New tool, it changed up the way the modifier buttons look. What you will have is 3 buttons instead of 4. The first button is making a new selection. As soon as you make your first selection with your marching ants, it's going to default over to your second button, which is adding to your selection. You could go and choose that button, the middle button, automatically from the start, if that works for you. The next thing you're going to have is where things can get kind of fun and funky and weird is you have a minified version of your brushes panel that you can pull up to be able to get a size of a brush, the hardness level, and the spacing of the brush. Now, going over this again, the hardness level is how hard edge to soft edge you want the brush to be. For something like this dog, I want a hard edge selection going around. When I make the selection of the dog, I want that to be kind of a hard edge selection, like a cardboard cutout kind of thing. If I wanted that soft transitional edge, I would turn that hardness number down. Probably not all the way down because I wouldn't want a completely soft, fuzzy edge. I would want something that's a little, kind of transitional. So Little bit, but not a lot for something like this subject. But I want to turn it all the way up. Now, the spacing I mentioned before, with the spacing and um, the shape of your brush, the spacing deals with how many of those shapes get stamped down at one time while you're clicking and dragging. If you turn that spacing number down from its default, I think it's 25% is a default number. I usually turn it down to 10. If you turn it down to that value, it will make it easier to kind of use this brush because you're painting a lot more of that shape in. So in the case of this brush with this quick select tool, it's going to sample more pixels faster to be able to make your selection a lot more accurate. That's how this tool works. It's kind of nice the way it does that, but that's just what you have to work with here. Now, the size of the brush is, again, up to you, but you use the square bracket keys to change the size. What I tend to do is this. With this quick select tool, number one, turn the caps lock off so you can actually see the circle. I would adjust the size of my brush to the smallest area that I need to select. So that way, if I get to this little area on its tail, I can still bring the brush almost to the edge of the subject and not really touch the edge. Because if you go outside of your subject with this tool, you'll end up picking the outside of the subject and not just the inside and the subject itself. But I would find that little small area so that way I adjust my brush to that size. And then it's either a click in a small area, that's a little small, tight area, you could do a single click, or you could do a click and drag around the larger areas of your subject and be able to start picking up the subject. What happens is that the tool is looking at the different color values that it's going across of the pixels, looking to see if those colors match within a particular range. Then there's no real way to set the range like a tolerance or anything like that. So it's just using what it's programmed to do, and it's finding that range of color, and it's just adding on to the selection as much as it can quickly. So you'll see it kind of jump around with the selection as you go around, but it starts picking up those areas until you finally stop. So this worked very, very well. Everybody loved this tool because of its speed. Instead of the magnetic lasso, instead of that magic wand, the other, marquee select tools, this worked pretty good. But then you ran into problems like right now. I went a little too far up towards the pause. Some of the background got selected. What do I do now? Well, you just go up here to the subtract, button, modifier button, come down to this area, maybe make the brush a little smaller in size, and just click and drag around that area you want to remove carefully, slowly, and it'll start to take that away from the selection because you chose the minus. So the more and more you could take more and more away from the selection until you get what you need. Keyboard shortcut time. If you want to, you could stay on the default modifier button, which is the one in the middle, and you can hold down your Alt key or your Option key on your keyboard. Let me show you with a bigger brush. See, I got a little plus sign there. If I hold down my Alt or my Option key, down my cursor has a minus. So it's subtracting from the selection. If you pay attention up here into the options bar, if you hold down your Option key, it will switch to your subtract from selection. It just goes back and forth as you hold the button down. Let go of the button, it goes back to the add to selection. So you can use that. Now, does this work? Yes, it works great. It works fast. It gets your subject, especially in high contrast areas. Lower contrast areas, you may need to finagle with it a little bit just to make sure that you're getting the accuracy that you believe you got. And it's going to work. And it works pretty well. It does a pretty decent job. Then you just move on to whatever else that you get to do. And the whatever else is going to be the next step. But we haven't gotten there yet because I want to show you two more of these selection tools. I want to pick a different picture because I'm sick of looking at this dog. So let me